Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laura Mullen, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Information Literacy and Teaching Strategies, sponsored by ProQuest. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features of the webinar software. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. Along the left-hand side, you will see a Q&A panel that you could use to submit questions or comments. We'll spend some time responding to your questions during the program, so please feel free to submit these throughout. And finally, please note that today's program will be recorded and all registrants will receive follow-up instructions on how to use the archived version. Our featured speakers today are Michelle Dakota and Serena Rosenhan of ProQuest, and Brian Gray of the Kelvin Smith Library at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. Michelle Dakota has a passion for building products that delight customers. After years in the semiconductor industry, building enterprise systems and developing intellectual property, she is now with the discovery team at ProQuest, developing search and content solutions to library customers and end student users. She serves as lead product manager for the content in ProQuest's Workflow Solutions division. Serena Rosenhan loves the challenge of making complex things easier to use and is happiest when she is observing or interviewing users. Serena brings over 15 years of experience in information architecture and interaction design, as well as 9 years of experience studying users of library resources, to her current work directing the activities of a growing user experience design team at ProQuest. Innovation, learning, and partnership are the hallmarks of Brian Gray's work as the team lead for research services at the Kelvin Smith Library at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. One of 50 staff members in the main campus library, Brian draws on a variety of skills, from teaching to technology, to serve and keep ahead of the library's users, which include almost 10,000 students in over 60 degree programs, faculty and staff, and the university's community. And now I'd like to hand it over to Michelle Dakota.
Thanks, Laura. Good afternoon. Good morning to those on the West Coast. Thanks for taking time out of your day to attend our session on the role of the library in the academic journey. My name's Michelle Dakota, and I'm a product manager for ProQuest's Workflow Solutions Group. We develop both librarian and student-facing software products and solutions that serve students, instructors, and librarians throughout the research lifecycle, such as the content and historical products available on the ProQuest platform, ebooks from eBury and EBL, Summon, 360 Link, RefWorks, and Entoda. Recently, we conducted 2 sets of end-user studies in conjunction with our corporate user experience team. These studies were aimed at informing our product development and refreshing our awareness of today's academic student. We framed our study broadly to answer the question, how do students search? And observed behaviors before students even started to work with software. Our work differs from other studies in that we examined the entire research life cycle. We interviewed students at varying points in their academic journey, and we included faculty and instructor interviews. Additionally, in analyzing the research, we found learnings that can guide the vendor side in product development, but also we found points of interest for the librarian, points we will share today. Look for publication of our study in the fall in the Journal of Library Administration. This session will give an overview of our research findings, and we include librarian response from Brian Gray of Case Western Reserve. Now, over to Serena Rosenhan, Director of User Experience Design at ProQuest.
Thanks, Michelle. So as Michelle mentioned, I work in user experience, and the job of user experience is to ensure that the things we make work well for those who use them. We spend a lot of our time designing and testing interfaces, but I like to describe our work as being advocates for the end user. In order to be an advocate, we need to be able to create empathy for what the user is doing, feeling, and thinking as he or she encounters our products. We know that researchers make use of many tools, people, and places to accomplish their work. So we designed this study to help us switch seats, so to speak, and understand the fuller context of the research activities we want to support with the products and content we offer here at ProQuest. We determined that to get that full context understanding, we needed to get to campus. So over the course of several months, we visited 6 campuses and talked to a total of 125 researchers, including undergraduates, graduates, and faculty, through a combination of focus groups and in-depth contextual interviews. This is the information from the 2 studies that Michelle mentioned aggregated. So our research questions centered around the broader experience of researchers with information, libraries, and academic work. Today I'll share a few insights gained about these topics, then briefly discuss what opportunities they create, not just for ProQuest, but also for librarians. I'll first share some common characteristics of the users we observed and interviewed, which we saw influence the ways they approached academic research. Many of the characteristics are shaped by the attitudes and assumptions, even expectations, they bring with them to academic research from other contexts. So first, we found that a connected device is part for today's student researchers. Every researcher we spoke to had a smartphone. What emerged as we talked to users about their broader experiences is that the expectations they have from experiences with information seeking and access in non-academic settings heavily influences the experience they have with information seeking and access in academic settings. This is probably not surprising to anyone, but there are some important implications to understand. Finding answers is second nature to the modern student. It's an activity they do successfully all day long. In their world, information is plentiful and immediately available. It just doesn't occur to them that finding answers for academic work will be, or even should be, different. But as they encounter academic work, they soon find there is a significant gap in experience between the 2 contexts, and they can struggle to negotiate this gap. One of the implications of this awareness that users bring with them by expecting information and finding answers to be a constant activity is, over the years, I've sometimes heard librarians or even vendors lament or fight against the expectations that Google creates in our searchers. Sometimes the implication is that students are lazy and they want shortcuts. One of the insights we gained from this study is that this isn't laziness. This is simply the way their world works. And in fact, they're very willing to work hard, but they don't see information seeking as academic output. They told us one of the pressures they feel when assigned a research paper or project is how much time it will take them to locate the resources they need to do the project. And they would rather spend their time analyzing and digesting and working with the materials. This was a great insight for us to take away. Another characteristic that today's researchers have from their connected instant gratification world is an inherent hesitation to ask for help. Most of them believe that they can and would prefer to solve problems for themselves. They learned technology by doing. They were not taught it by an authoritative source. Their parents weren't as tech savvy as they were. So they feel very confident in their abilities. They also feel very time pressed between their school and social life. And time is a commodity, a very expensive commodity for them. So resources that cost them time feel very expensive and inefficient. Also, some believe that asking for help from a librarian may be less efficient or more time than it's worth, and maybe just going directly to a professor or a peer. So because the tools and resources we create at ProQuest are experienced by students as part of the library, we felt it was important to understand not only the technicalities of how users interact with the tools, but also how they interact with the library and librarians. Most students' attitudes towards librarians reveal that they feel they're helpful, but maybe not essential. There's many students that have a view of librarians with a stereotypical perspective of maybe someone older with glasses crouched over a computer screen. Now, those who have asked for help all report that librarians are very helpful and it was a good experience. But there are still many perceptions that create these barriers. Now, my picture here is a little bit unfair, but it's a literal representation of the perceived distance between students and librarians that we might need to imagine overcoming. One of the concerns expressed by students is that librarians are more focused on the process, the how of searching, and less on the what. They may not know my subject matter. One student said, typically my topics are so weird, librarians can't really help me. This is a German studies student. So there's a distance and a disconnect between what a librarian can offer and what other sources can offer. That's a part of that academic experience. In terms of the library, students tended to appreciate the social aspect of the library, maybe the library as a group workspace, a central meeting point, but it wasn't central to their research process because everything, as far as they understood, was available online. And many of them even mentioned that if they needed to talk to a librarian, there was a chat feature they could make use of. So the library and its role is maybe less central to the research activities of students. So while it's true that students bring a lot of expectations and experiences with them to academic research, we found that over time their experiences with academic research also influence their behaviors in several ways. First and most notably, instructors are a primary influence on the search and research behaviors. This influence can be indirect, for example, simply the requirements to cite scholarly or peer-reviewed resources affects where a student chooses to search and how they're searching. Students, as they narrated for us why they were doing what they're doing, frequently made reference to, I'm required to do X, so I'm using this feature or this tool. The influence can be very direct. For example, an instructor might require the use of a particular resource or may demonstrate a resource in class. When that happens, students will always start with that resource and attempt to fulfill the assignment using just that resource. That is the prescription they've received. Other ways might be providing a list of scholarly journals. In this case, we've seen students actually go and search journal by journal for information for their project. And there are other ways they can assign library instruction or arrange for a librarian to come into their course. But we observed that the faculty influence or instruction seems to trump the other influences, and students closely associated following those instructions with academic success. And for example, one of the ways that was manifest is that impacted the students' willingness to persist in the face of barriers. or try to use tools that they may not have elected to use on their own if they were seen as part of the expectation or recommendation of the faculty. Now, this perhaps is not an unexpected finding in and of itself, but the implications here are important. The faculty and instructor is the most constant of all the influences. There's an established relationship there that is already integrated into that student journey. And the library can't really be effective without understanding or maybe joining in or emulating that experience. Another influence in the academic process was library instruction. We saw lots of evidence that library instruction plants seeds that influence research behavior. For example, students learn very strongly the message that library resources ensure access to credible and scholarly content that they are required to cite in their papers. And we saw that library instruction made a big difference in student awareness of library resources. They simply don't discover them on their own. And in cases where students had not had the instruction or it wasn't stressed, they are more likely to focus on open web searching to solve their research needs. And they struggle using library resources and understanding what they are about. Other ways that library instruction has influence is basic strategies and starting points learned from instruction tend to be repeated throughout a student's academic journey. For example, if there was a particular resource demonstrated during instruction, students would go back to that resource and use it again and again. We saw use of discovery services was strong where it had been recommended as the starting point and less strong where it had not. In fact, when it hadn't been taught, students were not really clear what that search box on the web page was for, what it would give them. And another influence of library instruction we saw, students who narrated us through experience of starting at a particular database, often going to the database list and navigating down, often didn't even remember the name of the database. But they said, it's this one here. They knew the subject and they knew the location on the page. Somebody had shown them where it was and they knew how to repeat that. But we also found from the students that while library instruction was valuable, first-year library instruction was not enough. And they it was too general to be of use as they got into their later courses. So they found subject-specific training in their later years, maybe the third year or the fourth year, had been much more valuable and useful to them. And another interesting thing we noted was that graduate students and transfer students often had a gap because they hadn't had library instruction for that particular university. So more ongoing touch points with library instruction would benefit these students. So what did we learn about how students are conducting research? One of the things we saw was that the natural research flow of a student takes them in and out of multiple sources, depending on where they are in that process. So strong relevance, ease of use, the smart auto-suggest behavior makes Google a very inviting starting place for students, especially as they are in the initial phases of their research, topic selection or refinement. But almost every student knew that they would not find citable information using Google. Another time when students turned to Google is when they didn't expect the library to have what they needed. For example, an assignment to create a business plan for an affordable, healthy fast food restaurant. They needed data to build that business plan, and they didn't think the library would be the place to find that. We found that students used discovery services or Google Scholar when they'd been taught about them, when they had a general topic or it was multidisciplinary in nature, or when they were concerned about getting comprehensive results. In fact, we found that a common perception was that Google Scholar would give them everything, whereas the library's discovery service would only give them limited things that just the library had. Now, databases were generally preferred to support more discipline-specific work. And students who were gaining knowledge in a particular domain or major often had been taught to rely on one or two seminal must-know resources that they went to again and again. And they were starting to use some of the more powerful features of those databases. So we found that the databases that were successful aligned well to the curriculum and majors and became those go-to resources. But we did see pain points in these experiences, and once students had had a bad experience with one of these resources, they tended not to return, and they would look for alternative ways to accomplish their tasks. And we did see that there were many real barriers to accessing library resources as students went in and out of these tools. They were often confronted with what they would call a paywall, or they would be asked to log in, or they would have broken links. And when confronted with these, students will back out. They don't troubleshoot. They will just go back and try another link that will get them more immediate access to the full text. Another challenge is the library website, or even just the overwhelming nature of library resources. One student mentioned that maybe the library has these things, but I think I can find them faster through Google. It would be too difficult to find them. And then they experience the frustrations expressed in the quote here on the screen, which is they think there might be a good resource, and then they try to find it in the library, and there's no access, and it's this sort of cycle that they work through back and forth, finding out what they can access and what's available. And we did find that even though students are hesitant to ask for help, they still need it. They still need help finding good resources and being aware of things like government documents, data sets. It's an interesting experience as a researcher to sit and watch someone do their homework and know that that library has the perfect database for them, but they're out searching Google. And of course, we let them do that to preserve the integrity of the research. But these are the pain points some of the pain points that we saw our researchers experience. So how can we respond? Well, a great part about this study is that our findings can be used both by ProQuest to make products better, but it can also be used by librarians to inform how they can improve the students' experience with research. We both are asking the kind of question, what's going on before they come to our site? How do we understand that? And how can we get more involved in that process? So at the beginning, I spoke about the mission of user experience being to advocate for the user, to ask questions that help us switch seats. An early mentor of mine used to explain the work of user experience in this way. We have technology on one side, we have a user on another, and our role is to try to bring those touch points closer to the experience and understanding of the user. Well, our research suggests the need for the same thinking about libraries. Libraries need to make sure the interface points between the library and the user connect to and even reflect the student's academic experience over the structure and logic of the library. How do you do this? Well, to advocate means to care, and it means to ask questions that help you switch seats. So I'd like to suggest that we start by having a user-centered view that understands that libraries support students, teachers, and researchers. We tend to hear the word patrons used in context of the library, but I feel this inaccurately implies a much higher level of intention and investment than real-world academic library use manifests. A patron is someone who goes to patronize and use. Students are on an academic journey with many touch points and influences. Our findings suggest that there's a great opportunity for the library to reach outside the typical space and role and touch researchers where they are. It may require stronger outreach and partnering with faculty as the primary influencers of researchers. It may require a shift in thinking about the role of the library from curate to educate. In a few minutes, we'll hear from a librarian who's actively making this shift, working to understand and respond to many of the same dynamics we've observed in our research. But before we do that, let's take a few minutes to see if there's any questions.
Thanks, Serena. In the interest of time, we'll go ahead and move right to Brian Gray. I'd like to introduce Brian Gray, Team Lead for Research Services at the Kelvin Smith Library at Case Western Reserve University. We'll be serving up questions at the end of Brian's session.
Thank you, Michelle. And just to give a little background about Case Western for those who aren't familiar, so you have some context in my comments. We're just under 10,000 FTE. We have more graduate students than undergrad students. We are known largely for our engineering, medicine, and even our business programs. We are also a private institution, and our student body is largely residential or living very close to campus. So the freshmen are required to live on campus, and because of where we're located on the east side of Cleveland, most of our students stay very close to campus. So we're considered most of our students being very residential. What I'm going to talk about today is some things we've done in our last strategic plan and some things we're looking to do in our next strategic plan that closely resemble the learnings from the recent study we just heard about. And many of these things we've already done, things we're trying, and the things we're hearing from students echo largely what was just reported in the study. So we just came off our last strategic plan. It was about a 3-year plan. Our new plan will be coming out here just in a few weeks. We have some finalization we're doing. But some of the focus areas that came out of the last plan is we largely refocused the role of the library and the staff in the library to try different things. So we developed a digital scholarship team, which I'll talk a little bit about. We brought our very first marketing person onto the staff, so a full-time marketing person, because the messages that were going out from the library weren't always consistent. It always depended on the librarian or the staff member interacting with the student and their own personal experience with a service or resource. And so we wanted to create a common theme among our marketing and also teach this marketing person would also teach all the librarians and staff to play the role in the marketing, but to carry some of these common threads. We also, to take on some of these challenges, we also hired our first ever development officer. So we were shared on campus previously with other people, so now we have a person dedicated fully to the library who works closely with development officers all over campus to partner on opportunities. And just recently, in the last few weeks, we hired our first ever assessment officer. So our number of staff have not changed, but as positions in the library were no longer seen as strategic, or because of technology, there was less work to do in a certain area, we repositioned these roles to create these new positions that we thought would really place the library into conversations with students and faculty and really develop a relationship with student and faculty research rather than just being a source of collections. Through the process, we also realigned our budget to match some of these things. In the next year, these are some things we're looking to do before I go into things we've already accomplished. One of the things is we'll be drastically increasing our digital scholarship, and I'm going to talk more about that, but providing resources and services and technology to the students when they want it. So we had a multimedia center in our main library, but it had only daytime hours, yet during the fall and spring semesters we're a 24/7 library. So the access to the technology and software and equipment wasn't matching what students were doing and when they were working. So after taking extensive gate counts, seeing when people were in the building, comments, surveys, focus groups, we needed to change our model to provide those services when students actually wanted to work. We're also looking for opportunities to embed ourselves in the research process, and I'll give you some more examples of that. Another one that we're really going to change this coming year is redoing our instruction strategy. And we're looking at many of the things the survey reported. So not just targeting first semester classes, because we know that's a good time to get in there, because as the survey says, we know that's not the best time because they're not doing research. So first or second semester might be just to make them familiar with the library, but we're really going to focus our instruction on the second semester, third semester, fourth semester, when they're actually doing research, and that will be in direct partnership with faculty. We're also looking to expand instruction without more library bodies. So to do that, we'll be doing more train the trainer type programs with faculty. So are the faculty speaking about the library resources in the way that we think is best? Are they highlighting all the resources, or do they just speak to the one resource they have always used? So preparing faculty to really send our message out among the students. I'm going to also talk about our personal librarian program in a second, but we're looking to expand the current offering, which is for incoming freshmen, to other groups on campus, like international students or research centers or staff on campus maybe that don't feel like they have a direct direct connection with the library. So I'm not even going to expect anyone to read this, but later on you'll have this available, and it's also on our website. But we did map out our last strategic plan. We did focus on some things that were universal to the university strategic plan, such as finances. But then we focus on things on, you have the obvious ones like collections and connections, but we actually spend a lot of time on customer. And we typically, I don't hear many people in our library speak to our users as patrons. I often hear customer or user or student or faculty member. So we had this customer perspective part of our strategic plan that really focused directly on how do we work with students and faculty and staff, and how do we develop those relationships so that they remember we're the come-to point for those parts of the research. So one of those strategic changes we made was we redid our librarian model. So our public-facing librarians, some of them did reference, some did instruction, some did collections, and then there were some that did all three areas. We refocused and brought everyone together to one unified team, which now they have 4 components that they all participate in, one being instruction. And through that, we've increased, and we're finding ways to increase self-service tutorials and videos, things that students can use when they're working, but also to make it available to faculty to either start a conversation before we come to class, or prepare the students so that we can maybe go to a more advanced topic when we come to class. And the faculty are helping us decide what those best tools are and what that content is. We've also drastically thought about our collections in a different way, where we're finding more and more opportunities for students and faculty to provide input. And so we're really targeting the collections instead of let's collect everything to let's make sure we're getting exactly what's needed. The other 2 areas is the traditional area of reference, and we've really changed it. We don't use reference as a word anymore. We focus more on research, because we don't want just they have a single question coming to the library, but they're proposing a research project and they want to derive how they're going to do their research. They want to talk about how are they going to format their data so they can use it later. They're looking how to manage their research. They're looking on who on campus can they collaborate, and we've offered to be that touch point to bring in those partners. So we don't want to be just, I have a question, the librarian will provide an answer, or I have a question, the librarian can find me a journal or a book, but that the librarian can actually be a partner in that research. We also ramped up our relationships directly with faculty. We know that they tell the students a lot of our students, including undergrads, are doing research directly for faculty members. And so if they're speaking poorly about the library, or not saying the right things, or they're limiting their conversations to students to the one resource they've used for the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, the student's not getting the full impact of what's available through the library. So we've really ramped up working with faculty so they really understand the library and they can speak properly about the library. And we know they're still going to promote their favorite items, but if they have the better scope of the services and the people in the library that can help, that's the best thing for us. So one of the steps we took is we needed to clear up time for the librarians. And I know a lot of libraries have done this, where we've got away from our reference desks. For us, the statistics showed this was long overdue. We were getting minimal contact, but even that, we were in we had 3 service desks on one floor, all within sight lines of each other, and we were bouncing users from desk to desk, and students were really getting frustrated that they had to go to different desks to do different things, and that we kept bouncing them around. And so we've got rid of those 3 desks. and we're down to 2, and they're very unique in their efforts, and now the students are not getting bounced around. We then were able to put librarians on call so that they are available to help immediately. Our offices are pretty close, just up one flight of steps, and it's a wide open building, so we can see what's going on. But we were also now able to go to department offices, department seminars, be at campus events, and to be where the students and faculty were actually seeing us. We also expanded some of our virtual offerings and also brought other people in the library into the virtual conversations, such as our circulation staff. So we helped train them up on some of the things that they were already answering, but to make sure our answers were consistent between our 2 teams, and they were taking on some more of those things for us so that we could take on some larger research issues that faculty and students were asking. So here's our old desk. You can see it's a monstrous desk, takes a lot of the first floor, and the reference desk was within a few feet of the circulation desk, and in the way back part of the picture, we also had a multimedia desk. Students didn't know which desk to go to, and often they were bounced between desks depending on their question. So we said, well, let's try something new. So we piloted some things. We got some mobile furniture, and our first phase was to combine the reference and circulation, and eventually we just got rid of reference altogether and just had this single desk. And we now do a side-by-side model like you'd experience in an Apple store or even some department stores. So instead of looking and working across the counter where the librarian or staff member or student worker is hidden, we are now face-to-face, working together side by side. So this was our task desk. We also added a welcome desk, so now students, faculty, staff that come to the library are greeted, and we also, faculty, staff, students have to show they touch their ID to the black box there on the desk, and it beeps that they're allowed to have access, and guests have to provide a photo ID for scanning. But everyone's greeted as they come in the library and help provided directions to where they need to go. And then eventually you can see this is our final desk. The concept works, so we just found some permanent furniture. And here's our final desk. And you can see some of the other things we did. We got rid of the multimedia desk. So you can see off to the side picture here, we'd like the joke about our Best Buy display. All the equipment's on display on pedestals so people could try it. There's hints on the signage by each device telling you what it's good for and what it's not good for. And then underneath that are locked cabinets with the devices being charged, ready to go, that the staff at this desk can check out. They do all the walk-up reference. They also hand out our interlibrary loan on reserves, and we've added the vending machine for laptops. So it's sort of one service model for everything. They need help, they can quickly call to the reference librarian, the research service librarian that's on call, and we come down and assist. We also did a lot in marketing, and these were largely student-generated ideas. We had a contest where we actually gave out large sums of money for a proposal. So students were given blueprints, they were given our strategic plan, and they were walked through the library in groups. They had interview times with different staff members, and they got so many weeks to put together a proposal that went in front of a juried committee. They had a couple hours to present, and then the winning group got money, and we're actually repeating that contest now. But some of the ideas that came out of it was this virtual display, the types of things that should go up on it, the art on the elevators, which shows people in the library and not just collections, so that get a sense that the library is about so much more than just collections. New signage, new technology came out of the student competition. This is our multimedia center, which actually this equipment in the back glassed area is all coming out on the main floor, and the back center is being remodeled this summer to be more of a collaborative space where faculty or students could come and work on a project, and they could bring other campus partners into the conversation and have a shared space while they're working on the project. The signage all came from the student conversation, so you can see on the left-hand side the blue, orange, that's like an off red and green. The areas of the library are color-coded now, so when you're on every floor, you can now see what's available and what's not available for that floor, and the signage directs you to those specific areas. The students also wanted more color, art, other things. They really felt it was home once they were here, so they wanted to be able to hang out, really enjoy it. So our building was very white previously with little art. We've partnered with local museums that have collections that they had stored for a long time. We've worked with local artists. We've worked with researchers on campus to provide different types of art and other information. There's just another sign with the signs off in the background. We also drastically recreated our virtual presence. And this was also largely driven by working directly with faculty and student focus groups, quizzes, surveys. But what we wanted the website to do is highlight people and not just collections. We also decided at that point we rolled out Summon, and we wanted it to be present everywhere. And part of the reason we wanted to do that is it offered other opportunities for circulation staff and others to help with simple reference if they all knew a single tool rather than having to know our 200 plus databases. And we rolled out all kinds of social networking at the same time. So you can see here's our snapshot of the library website, and the library and Summon are at the top banner throughout our website and our lib guides from SpringShare. And we have staff training so everyone in the library is able to use it. And so even if you're not a specialist, a subject specialist, you at least have a good starting point when you're working with students. We also decided to get away from the standard, let's just track how many times we talk to somebody. We still do that because there's times you have to report those statistics. But now the statistics we also collect are things like stories, comments. You helped me a month ago, and now I've taken that information and applied for a grant. Or a book was published and the library was acknowledged in it. Things like that are just as important as the hash marks. And so we're starting to collect those impact statements over just a standard check mark. We also rolled out our personal librarian conference and our personal librarian program, and also a related conference. And in that conference, we had a student panel, and it was students from Case Western and also from Cleveland State University, which is just down the street a few minutes from us, who is a state school, very different student population, often many first-generation students. And this panel was asked different questions about their library experience, reflecting back, they were juniors and seniors, reflecting back on their 3 to 4 years, and at least one of them also worked in libraries, so they had a really strong reflections of how their experience with the library has changed. And they all across the board said they were afraid to ask. And it was either they were afraid to ask because they've never had to ask before. Maybe they were a top student in high school, so they'd never had to ask. Or it was always just so simple to do something technology-wise to give it a try. Or they just didn't even know who to ask. They came into a library, it was a large building, lots of people, they didn't even know who to go to. So our personal librarian program was an attempt to assign a person to each incoming student. And so every incoming student now gets a personal librarian. There's regular emails and messages and events targeting those students. And this year, this past year and going into this year, we also assigned the students so that each floor in the residence halls got the same personal librarian. So once a personal librarian developed a relationship with a student, that student would share those results with other students, and it would grow. And we host our campus orientation part of the program in the library, and that's when they also get to meet their personal librarians. And the goal is not to teach them about the library, but just make them feel comfortable coming into the library, make them know a face, give them someone that they can ask questions of later when they're really needed, whenever they need it. And we don't know when that is always. So this gives them that foundation that they can always come back later. And here you see the students interacting with their personal librarians. Finally, the other thing we did strongly with talking with faculty and students is to get involved in the entire research process. So we're developing this digital research service librarians and these digital services so that we're having conversations and interactions throughout the entire research process, and not just at the last point when the people have a question or need to fill in something or they're formatting their paper. So looking for opportunities to get into the conversation early on, even if we can't help, so that we know how it's developing, so that when we can help, we have the best opportunity. And I think we have some time for more questions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Brian, for sharing your work. That was just fantastic. We've got just a lot of questions. For those in the audience, we're going to handle the ones where I've noticed a strong interest and then we can take some questions offline as well. You could reach out to Brian, or you could reach out to me or Serena offline. Brian, the first question is for you. There was a lot of interest in the personal librarian program. And the first question is there a maximum number of students assigned to a personal librarian? And also, along with that is, do they become overwhelmed with the work?
Okay. So when we first rolled out the program 3-4 years ago, we did have librarians that had up to 100 students, and it was not overwhelming. We did make sure that was the research service librarians who are used to working with students. We've shrunk that number just to make it so there's more people interacting with students. Now every full-time salaried person in the library is considered a personal librarian. So librarians are doing it. Our catalogers, our IT folks, even our library administration has personal students. So now most people have 30 to 40 students. And it's minimal. It's mostly email, virtual. Students love to work virtual. And a couple of events that they attend in the residence halls during the semester. So they're not doing more work. They're just joining an event that already occurs so students aren't overwhelmed with new events.
Great, thanks, Brian. And then along those lines, there was interest in your conference that you described. Do you have another one of these personal librarian conferences planned?
We will. So we just announced we're doing another one in April of 2016. We're finalizing the date. It'll be a 2-day conference. It'll cover anything related to personal librarian programs and or first-year experience. And there will be a call for presenters and posters.
Fantastic. Then along a bit of a different line, we had a question from a smaller library. Your strategic plan really describes quite a big team that you have to work with. What recommendations would you have for how you might apply a similar sort of approach, but in a smaller library setting?
Mm-hmm. So I think that some of the things we were able to do, because we have some smaller teams that had to tackle a lot, so I think some of their strategies would work well. We really did narrow things down to things that were directly relevant to the university plan, and that way the library staff that was involved really saw the relevance and were able to maybe put in a little bit of extra effort to accomplish things. But we did narrow things down by what would be the biggest impact immediately. So a couple things we did start from scratch, and like the personal librarian program, we didn't have that. But other things we said, what can we do incrementally? And it didn't have to be accomplished in the 3-year plan, but let's just start the process and maybe it gets finished in the next plan. So I think those would be good strategies for a smaller library.
Great, thanks. And then switching gears to your reference revamp. We've got a question about how you handled that. Are you still staffing a service point with librarians, or did you switch to a primarily consultation or appointment model?
So our main service desk now is staffed just by staff and student workers. The librarians are available from 11 to 5, Monday through Friday. We have one person always on call in the building. They have to be either at their desk, at their phone, or on cell phone, so they can walk to the desk at any time to help. And we also have a second person always on the virtual chat and reference. So there's always 2 people that quickly could be accessed. And the rest of the interactions, the librarians are setting up directly by appointment. And a large percentage of those are happening outside the library in the departments.
Okay, great. We'll switch gears. I've got a couple questions for Serena. Serena, several librarians had questions around interlibrary loan. They wanted to know that even if their delivery is within 24 hours, is this still seen as a dead end or a barrier to students?
What we found is when students had had a positive experience with that in the past, then they would continue to use that. I think there's an initial reluctance because it's not instant enough. If they can find another way to get that full text, they're going to pursue that. But we did also find that students who were pursuing maybe larger projects, more long-term, where they had a need for comprehensive coverage, they were much more willing to make use of an interlibrary loan type service.
Fantastic. Thanks, Serena. And then we have got another question. I reworded it a little bit from the chat, but do students perceive that instructors had technology gaps? What was sort of the perception of the tech savviness of their instructors, or did that play into the responses at all?
That specific perception of instructors didn't really emerge in what we heard from students. But I think there's still an inherent willingness to listen to your instructor because they are the ones that are really the gatekeeper of your academic success. So if the students saw a pretty close connection between what the instructor recommended that they do and their potential of success on the assignment or the class, and I think there was much more willingness and latitude, a recognition of a need, whether they were tech savvy or not, didn't really come up in those contexts.
Thanks, Serena. And then back to Brian. We just have so many questions in. We will not be able to get to every question. Instead, I think we've got Brian's contact information up, and we'll post Serena's contact information for follow-up later. We've got time for just a couple more questions. This is for Brian. Again, back to the personal librarian concept. Do faculty also get a designated personal librarian? How are you interacting with faculty?
So that's sort of the change we have coming. So, every subject department on campus did have a research service librarian assigned, and that's still true. But what we discovered is there's a lot of faculty or staff that aren't directly affiliated with those subject departments. Either they're in the research areas, they're in central administration, other support services. So we plan on expanding the personal librarian model to make sure every office or key center knows who their contact is in the library. So it won't be a personal librarian because we don't want to water down the branding and marketing we've made with the freshman efforts. But in this next strategic plan, we're going to define everyone that does not have a direct contact with the library and make sure they do have a direct contact.
Okay, and then one more question for you, Brian. Did you have to convince administration about the return on investment for your strategic plan, or were they already supportive? How did you really get this thing going at Case Western?
So I think our university administration was very supportive. We also had a new university librarian that came in at this time who also got a title that included provost, associate provost in his title, so he was directly aligned with the provost office. And what we were able to do is we used a balanced scorecard measure, so all our results were constantly updated and made public so that people could see the results at any time and see what the impact was. So it wasn't we reported we're going to do this and then 3 years told them here's what we accomplished. We put up quarterly and 6-month updates for all our goals publicly on our website for people to see.
Fantastic. We are just about out of time. Thank you to you both, and I'll turn this back to Laura to close out. And just so you know, I will post my email address in the Q&A. If you've got other questions, feel free, of course, to reach out to Brian or to myself or Serena, and we can follow up. Also, look for our article publishing our results in the Journal of Library Administration in the fall. Thanks so much, and over to you, Laura.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. I'd like to give our panel a big virtual round of applause for spending time with us today and sharing some great information. As a reminder, we have recorded today's program, so do be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice that will include instructions on accessing the archived version. Thanks again to all of our participants